At 6 feet tall and barely 170 pounds, DeVante Smith didn't look like a wide receiver built for Sundays. This is the story of how the skinniest receiver in NFL history proved everyone wrong. At 6 feet tall and barely 170 pounds, DeVante Smith didn't look like a wide receiver built for Sundays. In fact, in terms of height to weight ratio, he's the skinniest receiver the league has ever seen. He was labeled too thin, too fragile, too light to survive in the NFL. From being overlooked and passed on in the draft to becoming a Heisman winner and Super Bowl champion, this is how a wide receiver that was too skinny humiliated the NFL. Growing up, DeVante Smith stood out not because of his size, but in spite of it. In high school, Smith ran track, starred on the basketball court, and even doubled as a defensive back. But as a junior, a broken collarbone knocked him out for the season and made him want to quit. That year, he stood on the turf of the Mercedes-Benz Superdome, helpless, while he watched the opposing school win the state championship he couldn't fight for. In that moment, something inside him changed. His coach called it a hunger in his eyes, the kind of look that separated the good players from the great ones. From that point forward, Smith was different. Every ounce of frustration was turned into fuel. By the time he was a senior, he was a 5-star recruit, the number 3 wide receiver in the nation, and the top player in Louisiana. Yet the whispers never went away. Too small, too much of a risk. And that's exactly why he chose Alabama, the hardest possible proving ground. If he was going to silence every doubt, he wanted to do it on the biggest stage in college football. During his freshman year, buried on a roster full of NFL-bound receivers, Smith waited for a shot, and when it came, he etched his name into college football history. 2nd and 26th overtime in the national championship game. One route, one perfect throw from Tua Tagovailoa, and it was Smith streaking into the end zone to seal Alabama's title. It was his only catch of the night, but it would go down in history forever. Over the next few seasons, he turned into the Tide's most reliable weapon, playing alongside first-rounders like Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, and Jaylen Waddle. Smith wasn't supposed to be the guy, but time and time again, he looked like the most polished receiver of them all. Smith's routes were so precise, his hands were strong, he got up to speed so quickly, and the way he ran was effortless. In 2019, he put up 274 yards and 5 touchdowns in a single game against Ole Miss. That same season, he lit up LSU's loaded secondary for 213 yards and 2 scores. By the end of the year, Smith was Alabama's leader in receiving yards and touchdowns. And then, when Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, and Tua Tagovailoa left for the draft, Smith faced a choice: follow them or return for one more year. "I have unfinished business to take care of," he said, "and the only way to do that is to stay one more year." That decision turned the 2020 season into something the sport hadn't seen in decades. When Jaylen Waddle went down with an injury, the Tide's offense fell squarely on DeVante Smith's shoulders, and instead of cracking, he exploded. 203 yards and 4 touchdowns against Mississippi State, 231 yards and 3 scores against LSU, 15 catches for 184 yards and 2 touchdowns in the SEC title game against Florida. But the finale against Ohio State is what cemented his legacy. In just over 2 quarters, he torched the Buckeyes for 215 yards and 3 touchdowns before leaving with a hand injury. Alabama cruised to another national championship, and Smith was named Offensive MVP. That season, he caught 117 passes for 1,856 yards and 23 touchdowns, leading the nation across the board as he became the first wide receiver to win the Heisman since 1991. So you'd think DeVante Smith's draft stock would be crazy high, right? Wrong. At 6 feet and barely 170 pounds, Smith was the thinnest wide receiver prospect of his height the league had ever seen. Trindon Holliday once played at 166 pounds, but he was 5 feet 5 inches. Smith had the thinnest height to weight ratio the NFL had ever seen. The negative scouting reports piled up. Bone thin. Concerns about his frame and durability. One scout even said, "This guy has a weird body. He's way too skinny below the waist. Just look at him on tape. He has funny looking legs, chicken legs." He was so unique that when he entered the draft, the NFL didn't even have a comparison player for him. In fact, he ended up being compared to Warriors point guard Steph Curry. On draft night, Smith wasn't seen as a guaranteed star. He was a gamble. But one team wasn't buying the doubt. The Philadelphia Eagles believed Smith's game wasn't about weight. It was about the fact that when the ball was in the air, no one could cover him. They traded up to the 10th overall pick to make sure they got him. As a Giants fan, I was actually devastated. The Cowboys held the 10th overall pick, and they had a loaded wide receiver room, so there was no way they were going to take him. And the Giants had the 11th overall pick, so I was like, oh my gosh, the Giants are going to get DeVante Smith. I was so excited. They really needed a wide receiver. But then, per usual, and a not so rare occurrence, the Eagles broke my heart. I'm nervous, but I'm getting excited, guys. I'm getting excited. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't get excited so I don't get upset. But oh my gosh, oh my God, the Eagles just traded in front of the Giants. Oh my gosh, they're gonna take Smith. They're gonna take Smith. Oh my gosh, I literally cannot get excited about anything with the Giants. This is a joke. The moment DeVante Smith walked onto an NFL field, the whispers didn't stop. They got even louder. Could a 170-pound receiver really handle corners built like linebackers? Could he last 17 games without snapping in half? Everyone wanted to see if the too skinny kid would finally get exposed. Week 1 in Atlanta gave the first answer. On his very first NFL catch, he scored a touchdown in the same city where Alabama had won a national title off his walk-off catch. From there, the rookie moments started piling up. Against Kansas City in Week 4, Smith and the Eagles went toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes' high-powered offense, and he hauled in over 120 yards. Against Denver in Week 10, he out-jumped defenders for 2 touchdowns, becoming Jalen Hurts' most dangerous weapon. The chemistry between the two was clear, both from their Alabama days, and it gave the offense an identity it had been missing for years. By the end of the season, Smith had racked up 916 yards, breaking the Eagles' rookie receiving record, a mark that had stood for over 30 years. He played in every single game, shutting down every durability concern. The thing was, Smith didn't change his style to fit the NFL. He survived the league. Instead, the league had to adjust to him. However, things were about to change. In 2022, the Eagles made a splash, trading for A.J. Brown, a 225-pound powerhouse who looked nothing like the 170-pound Smith. Suddenly, DeVante wasn't the only elite wide receiver on the team, but make no mistake, this wasn't a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 thing. We feel like we got 2 really good receivers, A.J. Brown said. We got wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 1. DeVante does a really good job holding down his side, making plays over and over again. You can't forget about Skinny. That man, as soon as you forget about him, he'll take it over the top. Defenses had a nightmare decision to make. Double Brown and you leave Smith one-on-one. Shadow Smith and Brown would bulldoze you. No matter what they picked, someone was going to eat. And Smith feasted. Week 3 in Washington, 8 catches, a touchdown, and a career-high 169 yards. Week 16 against Dallas. With the NFC East on the line, he shredded the Cowboys for 113 yards and 2 scores. That season, Smith recorded 5 different 100-yard games as he finished with 1,196 yards and 7 touchdowns on 95 receptions. And then came the postseason, where legends are made. Against the Giants in the divisional round, he caught the opening touchdown that set the tone for a blowout win. A week later in the NFC Championship, Smith pulled off a one-handed 4th down snag on the Eagles' opening drive that sparked a touchdown and ultimately a trip to the Super Bowl. Playing Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs on football's biggest stage, Smith was the game's leading receiver with 7 catches for 100 yards. The Eagles may have fallen short, but Smith had cemented himself as one of the most reliable playmakers in the league. A year later, Smith posted another 1,000-yard campaign, 81 catches, 1,066 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Nearly identical to his breakout year, but far more difficult because every single game, they doubled him, jammed him at the line, but still, he kept producing. And then came January. In the wildcard round against Tampa Bay, Smith had 8 catches for 148 yards. However, he was the lone spark on an Eagles team that got beat down 32-9. The Eagles had the talent. Quarterback Jalen Hurts, one of the best wide receivers in the league receiver duos with Brown and Smith, and a dominant O-line. They were just missing one piece. Enter Saquon Barkley, the Eagles' prized offseason acquisition from their division rival, the New York Giants. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about it. Shame, 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 shame. However, while Saquon made the headlines, the Eagles quietly locked up DeVante Smith on a 3-year, $75 million contract extension. The kid who was once called a gamble on draft night was now being paid like a franchise player. But